In this video, we're going to be learning how to use the matrix view in Cakewalk by Bandlab. Hi folks, I'm Mike and I hope you're well. So if you've ever dived into the matrix view in Cakewalk by Bandlab without reading the manual, then you may have been there for a minute or two before you just went, not sure what this is all about, maybe not useful to me, and then you left. Well, I'm going to demystify the matrix view for you in this video, and I'm going to show you that it's quite simple to use and really could be very, very useful to you as a composition tool especially. So let's get started with an overview. So I thought we'd start off with an overview of the matrix view so you can get a good idea of what it's all about and how it may be useful to you. Then we're going to delve into exactly how to set it up and fine tune it so it becomes really useful to you. So I've got the matrix view open here in my Cakewalk. There's a couple of ways you can open it up. You can go up to views here and then click on matrix view, or you can press Alt 5 on your keyboard to open it up with a keyboard shortcut. Now when you first open it up, you're going to see a blank grid of these light grey squares. These are what we're going to call cells. Now I think the best way to think of these cells as pads on a drum pad machine, okay? Don't think of this as any kind of timeline. There's no these are not bars. We're not moving along with a timeline or anything like that here. In fact, any of the contents of these cells, I'll take some here, can be anywhere on this grid that you like, okay? Well, there's some restrictions to that. We'll get onto that later. But essentially, you can reorder these as you wish and just think of them as triggers, as pads on a drum pad, which are going to trigger one of two types of things that we can put in these cells. We can either put MIDI data in there, so some MIDI notes, which we can use to trigger either an external instrument or a virtual instrument from Cakewalk. And the other type of thing that we can put on there is audio data, okay, or just audio clips is a nicer way to say it. So I've got a couple of types of things in there already. So we'll start off by clicking on this cell here. Now I'm going to click on the play button here to actually play it. I've got some MIDI data in there, which is being used to trigger the SI drum kit, which comes with Cakewalk. I'll click on it so you can have a listen. Now, with the way I've got that set up at the moment, it will play in a continuous loop until I click on it again. Then it'll wait till it gets to the end of that loop before it stops playing. It doesn't stop playing immediately with the way I've got it set up at the moment. You can set it up so it will stop immediately. But just so you understand what's happening, the first click on it is starting the loop and the second click is stopping the loop. Now, as I say, we can either have MIDI data like that on there, or we can have some audio data. So let's click on this one here. This is some guitar. Let's have a listen. So we've got those two types of things that we can play. Now, how can we mix them up a little bit? Well, there's some rules about how we can mix them up. So first of all, let's look at this first row. This is actually made up of the MIDI data, and there's some variations on the beat that I've got here. So I'll play this one and then have a listen to the second one. There's just a slight variation on the snare drum there, okay? Now, the important thing to understand is that with each row, we can only play one thing at a time. So I couldn't play those two beats at exactly the same time, okay? Now, if I did want to play two beats at exactly the same time, then I'd have to put them on different rows, okay? Now, columns are quite different. Within a column, you can play 1, 2, 3, 4, as many as you like within the same column, okay? Now, let's demonstrate that. So I'm going to start off by playing this beat here, which is the first row, the first column. I'll play on that. There's the beat. Now, let's add in some bass guitar. I'll play that now. So we've got those two things playing simultaneously, and then I'll add in some guitar. So you can see there, I'll just wait for that bass to stop. You can see there that if we start to mix and match some of these cells, then we can actually start to really improvise some different parts to our songs as we go along. Now, there's a couple of different ways that we can trigger these cells. The way that I'm showing you here is with the mouse. It's probably the least useful way because you can only click on one thing at a time. What if you wanted to trigger 2, 3, 4 or more of these cells at the same time? Well, the best way to do that is to have it triggered with the keyboard. Now, I've got some triggers set up with my keyboard so I can play, for example, I'll move my mouse over here so you can see I'm not using it. So I can play that first drum beat with a key on my keyboard like so. And the same again, the first time I press it on the keyboard, it starts the loop. The second time I press it, it will stop the loop when it gets to the end of that measure. So that makes it really handy because I can start 2 at the same time. I can do this. So you can see there that the bass guitar and the drums were triggered at the same time. Another way that we can trigger several at the same time, it's slightly less flexible, but you may find it useful, is to actually trigger a whole column. You can see up here, I've got some columns named as main variation 2, break 1, break 2. So I can click on the top of that column and it's going to play everything in there. Let's have a listen. Let's go to break 1. So very, very useful. You could actually sort of set up, if you like, just some really straightforward variations, say verse, verse 2, variation, chorus, chorus variation, and just have it set up so that you can then kind of improvise that as you go along. So that's the basis of how it works, but there's lots of changes that we can make to this so that we can trigger these cells in different ways and have them have sort of different behaviors. Now, you may wonder, well, what's the point of just sitting here and improvising things? What's the end result? Well, the end result is that you can use the record feature here and then capture a performance, an improvisation, or just a performance of you using those cells, and that's actually going to record on your main timelines at the top. We'll get onto that much later, but that's an overview of how the Matrix sort of works and how you may find it useful. Next, we're going to go into exactly how I set this demo up, and you can follow along with me. So I've got a blank project open and I want to add some MIDI cells to my matrix view here, but I'll need to be able to hear them. So I've got to load in a virtual instrument. So I'm going to load in a virtual instrument which comes with Cakewalk for free. It's called SI Drum Kit. And if we go over to the right here, I'll just make sure plugins is selected here. Then I'll make sure instruments is selected. Then I'll go to the Cakewalk folder and I'll double click on SI Drum Kit there. Double click on that. Now I'm going to insert this just as a simple instrument. So I've just got simple instrument track selected there and I'll click OK, and you'll see that appear as a track. I'm just going to click on these double down arrows here so that we can expand that and see what we've got, and then I'm just going to double click or click on this icon at the top here, which is actually going to open up that instrument. We can hear it now. Cool. Now I want to change that to a different sounding drum kit, so I'll just go up to the top left here, click on that. I'm going to double click on Garage Kit there just to open up a slightly nicer sounding drum kit in my opinion. Cool. So we've got our sound now. Now we want to actually create some MIDI data in these cells to trigger that sound. And I'm actually going to use some of the grooves which come with this plugin. So you can see them here on the left-hand side. I'm going to expand the hip hop folder. I'm going to grab this groove here, hip hop 01. I'm just going to grab it with my left mouse button and drag it over to this cell and drop it there. Now, if you didn't know, this is quite a common thing to be able to do with plugins, not just Cakewalk plugins. Lots of commercial plugins do this, where you've got some grooves, which are essentially MIDI data. You can drag them out of the plugin. Now, in this case, we dragged it to the matrix view, but you could also drag it up here to a MIDI track there, and you can see that there. Now, that's very handy because then you can go in and edit that, so you can create variations. I'll undo that. Now, the keen-eyed amongst you will have noticed something when I did drag it onto the matrix view. Not only did I drag it there and it created that row, it also created a new MIDI track up here in the main view. I'll click on those double arrows again so that we can expand that. And you can actually see that we've got this MIDI track called Matrix MIDI Row 1. That's what it called it by default. I'm just going to rename it to Drum matrix, so it's a bit more user friendly. We can see what we're doing. Now, it created that MIDI track and then it's also added the MIDI data in there. However, if we click on play now, we won't hear anything at all. And that's because it hasn't been routed through to the SI drum kit. So we need to make sure the output for this MIDI track, if I just drag this bottom part down here so we can see the output, has the SI drum kit selected. So I'll go down, I'll click on that and click on SI drum kit. So now the output for this MIDI track is to the SI drum kit. I'll click on play and now you'll hear the drums. So we've got our first basic cell set up and it's playing that drum beat. Now I actually want to do a slight variation on this drum beat that I've got there. But in order to do that, rather than drag another one of these variations that they've got there, I want to make it my own. I'm actually going to drag the same one out of here onto the SI drum kit track up here, okay? So this is just a regular sort of MIDI information. I can close my drum kit now, I don't need it anymore. I'm going to double click on that little clip that I put there to open up now the piano view. And I'm just going to add a couple of snare beats on in the last sort of bar there. So this is the snare note here. I'm just going to add one in there by double clicking, add another one in there, double clicking, and I've got two snare beats at the end. I think they're probably going to be a little bit too loud, so I'm just going to drag their velocity down so that they're a little bit quieter, and I'll just return my playhead back to the beginning, click on play. And you can hear those two little snare beats at the end there. Close my piano roll view now. And now what I can do, if I open up the matrix view, it's on this tab down here, I can now drag this little bit of MIDI there down to that second cell, okay? And there we have our variation. So we've got the original drum beat here, and then the variation. Cool. So that's another way that we can add MIDI into a cell. We can actually drag it off of a track which is already there. Now I don't need this anymore, so I'll select it and I'll click on delete and that gets rid of that. You can also drag MIDI information straight from your desktop or from your computer and drag it into Cakewalk and drop it there. Or you may have some MIDI here in the media folder if you've got that set up to some different folders there. For example, in here I've got the MIDI Groove Clips folder and I could select some MIDI from there and drag it onto those cells. So there's a few different ways that you can get it in. So now that I've done that, I've got my drum kit with its two variations. I'm going to rename these cells. So the first one I'll rename to Drums 01. Pretty original naming scheme here. And I'll rename the second one to Drums 2. Okay, cool. So that's some drums. Let's go ahead and add some bass. So again, at the top here on the right-hand side, I'm going to need some bass. So I'll go to plugins, make sure instrument's selected. And this time I'm going to double click on SI bass guitar. So I'll double click on that. I'm going to keep it again as a simple instrument track. I'll click on OK. And you'll see that the bass appears there. Again, I'll just click on the double down arrows and I'll just click on its icon there to open up that bass guitar. And that's working fine. And again, I'm just going to use some grooves which come along with this one. So I'm going to open up the hip hop folder there and I'm going to just drag on hip hop 01. Now, I'm going to do it to a new row, okay, because I don't want this to trigger the drum sounds. I want it to trigger the bass. So I'll drag it onto a new row, drop it there, and as we can see, a new row has been created. And if we scroll here, we can see the new MIDI track, which it's created there. Again, I'll just expand that using those double arrows, drag it out a little bit more, and set its output there to SI bass guitar, okay. So now that I've got that routed through to there, I'm going to then just rename it to, of course, bass matrix. That just makes it a bit easier for me. So any sound is going to come from here, is going to be played through the bass. We'll just click on play here to test that. Absolutely fine. And then I'm just going to grab this one here. I'm just going to double check which one I want. I think it's hip hop 02, but I'll double check, click on it. Yeah, that's fine. That's the one I want. So I'll just drag that out down to here, and that's that one all created. I don't need to edit this with the MIDI or anything on this occasion. I'll just close off that plugin, rename that to, you guessed it, bass 1, and rename this one bass 2. Okay, cool. So now I can start off by playing my drums. I'll click on there and I'll add in some bass. Let's do a variation on the bass. And the second drums. Now we can stop everything by clicking here. That just stops all cells from playing. So that's a quick introduction as to how you can add some MIDI in there. Really useful that you can add some grooves from your favorite plugins, or you can create or edit your own MIDI up in the timeline and then drag that down to cells and get rid of it after you've done your little bit of editing. So we've got some MIDI available there. Now the other thing we want to add in is some audio. So the next thing I want to do is add some audio. It's really, really easy. There's several different ways you can get it in. First of all, you could drag it off of your desktop onto Cakewalk. You can add audio in that way. The other thing that you can do is add some existing audio from your project. So if I scroll down here in my project, I've got some audio here, some guitar recorded, and I'm just going to drag it from there onto my matrix view, and there you can see that's appeared. Now for this demonstration I'm not going to do it in that way, so I'll undo that and I'll actually get rid of that audio. The way I'm going to demonstrate it to you for this tutorial is to drag it from my audio library up here. So I've got my media tab open, I've got the audio library selected here from the drop down, and you can see it in there. Now I'm going to make this audio available for you for download from my website. I'll put a link in the description. I'm not going to go into how you get it into the audio library here, okay? That's beyond the scope of this tutorial. You can just drag it off of your desktop into the project if you want to follow along. But I'm going to be dragging it from my audio library, so I'll take the first one, which is just called guitar, and I'll drag it across. Now, importantly, I can't drag it onto one of these first two rows because they are MIDI rows, okay, which I've already created. And you can't mix and match MIDI with audio on the same rows in the matrix view. So I'll drag it to a new cell down here on a new row. I'll release it there, and you'll see that it's appeared there, and also up in our main view up here, it's created this new audio track. I'll click on the double arrows again to open that. It's called Matrix Audio Row 3. I'm going to rename that just to make it a bit more pretty to Guitar, Guitar Matrix. Okay, so I've renamed that. Now I can just go ahead and play that guitar. Let's have a listen. Okay, it's a little bit too loud for me actually, so I'm just going to make sure that's selected, and then I've got its a fader available here. I'll just drag it down like so, somewhere down there. It should be fine. A bit louder. And that's it. I've got my audio in there. So it's not quite as complex as adding MIDI audio. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is add a variation to that. So I've got guitar variation, and I'm just going to drag that to this cell here. Okay. Now, they're both going to be coming out of the same output. So that's cool. I don't have to set anything up new there. So here's the variation. Okay, so I've got my little sort of loop of guitar there playing with that. Now, I actually want to do some variations for the break, for the guitar break. So I'm going to drag that onto a different row. So I'll grab guitar break 1 here, and I'll grab it onto a different row. Now, as we can see, the default thing is when we drop to a new row there, it creates a new row, and depending on whether it's MIDI or audio, it creates a new track up here. So it's created that new track, Matrix Audio Row 4. Now, I actually don't want it to do that. I want my audio to come out of the same guitar channel as the first ones that I added here did. So I'm just going to go to the drop down selection here on that new row and select the output as guitar matrix. Okay, so now this one and this one are actually coming out of the same output in my console. So I don't need this new row or this new audio output which was created here. So I'll select that, right click and delete it. Okay, so I've just got one audio track for the guitar. So that's very cool. Actually, we can play these at both at the same time. So like this. And that can be very useful, of course. Now I'm going to add another guitar break in there, guitar break 2. And you'll hear that if I play these, they're just a harmony of each other. So this one and this one. So of course, the problem there is because it's a harmony, I can't play it at the same time as this one, because remember the rule, we can't play two things on the same row at the same time. So I'm just going to drag it down to a new row. And again, the same thing happens. It's created a new audio track up there, Matrix Audio Row 5. I don't want that, so I'll just select Guitar Matrix as my output there, and I'll delete that one that it created there. So I'll go to delete, and that means because these are now on separate rows, they can be played at the same time. So like so. So very useful indeed. Let's put the whole thing together a little bit now. So I'll start off by playing my drums. Let's have some bass guitar. Let's add in the first guitar. Oh, didn't press it. Okay, very cool. Now let's go to another variation with the bass. Let's add in those guitar breaks. And I'll click up here. Clicking on the exclamation mark up there stops all of the cells from playing. So very, very quickly there, I've created a situation where I could kind of improvise and put together a composition on the fly. Very useful indeed. Now, as I mentioned earlier, you can set this up a little bit easier than I was doing it there. So that if you just click on this here, for example, this top row of the top marker on the column there, I'll just click on that. Plays everything in that column, and we can right click on there and rename it to something like I don't know, verse. Fine. Oops, if you spell it right. So we can play the verse. If we click on that, click on it again to stop it as per normal. So obviously you can rearrange some of these. You can make copies of these cells really easy. So if we just drag it like so, it's just going to drag it around. But if we hold control on the keyboard and drag, it'll actually make a copy of that. So you can make copies of these rows of items and then create variations for different verses, choruses, that kind of thing. That's the basic setup. Now let's look into a little bit of how we actually control the behavior of these cells. By the way, are you finding this video useful? If you are, go ahead and hit the like button for me. Do it right away so that you don't forget. And if you do like this kind of content, make sure you subscribe and ring the bell on YouTube so that you're notified about my other videos. Now, back to this video. So let's look at how we can change the behavior of these cells. First of all, we've got it set up to its sort of default setting at the moment, whereas if we click on a cell, it's going to play that cell all the way through as a loop. And when we click it again, it's going to stop when it's completed the measure. And that's because we have this set to measure up here. That's the kind of stop behavior. Now, if we want it to stop immediately, we can just change this to immediate. And then when we click on this, I'll click again and it stops right away. So just like so, that's an immediate stop. We could change it to beat so that it at least plays to the end of the next beat. That makes it more musical in terms of stopping. So I can't do anything too unmusical there. And then we've got some sort of different variations or segments of beats that we can choose there as well. I'm going to change it back to measure for now and continue this demonstration. The next thing that we can control is whether it loops or plays through once or not. So we can change this from looping as it's set here so that it only plays each cell once. We'll click on that. When it gets to the end, I don't have to click again to stop it, okay? I'm going to set that again back to loop. The next thing that we can control is the latch mode. Now, this one's really, really important. At the moment, we're clicking once to start and clicking again to stop. But with latch mode on like so or off like so, then what we actually do is it plays as long as we're holding down. So I'll hold down with the mouse key and release. and it just stops as soon as I release. Now this applies as well later on when I've shown you how to map this to your MIDI keyboard. The same behavior applies. That can be very, very useful indeed. I'll switch it back to its default state at the moment. Now the next thing that we control is the re-trigger mode. Now this relates to when we have the main timeline playing. So I've clicked play up here. When we have this set at the moment, when we click on this, you'll see it just continues to play around in a loop, and then when we click it again, it stops. If we have this set on, we start and it will play in the loop, but when we click again, it will go back to the beginning, like so. Click again, and it's continuing to go back to the beginning. Switch that off, click again, and it stops. Okay, that's more of our normal behavior. So in other words, this means that when the main timeline is playing, every time we click, it will go back to the beginning when it reaches the end of its cycle. Normally, when we click for the second time, it stops, yeah? So that changes that behavior. The next thing, or the last thing I'm going to show you here, is the cell start mode. So what this does is, again, it synchronizes what's happening here with the main timeline up here. So if the main timeline is playing and we start, or if we click on this for an immediate start, I'll just set this to on, then if we're in the middle of a bar, it will start playing from the middle of this sort of little loop here. So I'll try and hit it in the middle of a bar like now. So that didn't work because we have to have this on immediate, in the middle of a bar, and you can see it plays from the middle of the bar. But as you saw there, I did have to have it set to immediate. So that's ways of controlling the way these cells behave globally. Just switch this off. So I'm going to set it back to default at the moment. Now, the keen amongst you will have already noticed that this is useful, but not that useful to have all of these cells behaving exactly the same way. So you can do some variations in terms of the loop mode and the latch mode, and you can see those two icons relating to that here. So if I want to change this guitar so that it doesn't loop, I can just click on there, and it's only going to play through once when I click on it. Okay, we'll wait for that to go through. And it just plays through once. Likewise, I could change the latch mode so that if I want to play this guitar, I have to hold down on it while it's playing. Because I've set that to immediate, I can do some cool things. So it can be really useful if you really want to sort of freestyle with a sample that you've got in there. It may not necessarily even be a loop. It could just be a chord or some sort of sound that you want to play and trigger it. And then you'll just be using this matrix view more just like the way that you would normally use a drum pad, okay? So we can change individual behaviors in terms of the way that we loop and also the latch mode. If we want to set that back to its whatever the global setting is, or just sync it with the global settings, just hold Control on the keyboard and then click on those icons, and it will make sure they're the same as the global setting. So it's obviously incredibly useful if we can trigger these cells using our piano keyboard or something like drum pads. Then we can trigger more than one cell at the same time. It's very easy to do. We'll start off by triggering this bass here. Now remember, this is a MIDI cell, and that MIDI is then playing the bass guitar instrument. So all we have to do is right click on that cell and then click on MIDI Learn, and then press a key on our keyboard. Now I'm going to choose the middle D, so I'll press that. Now you heard that note of D being played on the bass guitar because I've got it selected at the moment. That's an issue we need to get round, but let's just first of all press that key again and you'll hear the pattern start. I'll press it again. Now, the obvious issue there is it's playing that pattern, but it's also playing the note of D, the note that I'm pressing on the keyboard. Now, if you've tried to get around this already just by changing the input here, you may have done what I did originally, which is go to input and then select none, cleverly thinking, then it won't continue to receive the input. We'll select none, but look what happens on Cakewalk. It actually goes to Omni, because selecting none here is a way of saying I'm not selecting any of these, and therefore Cakewalk selects all of them. So that is not a workaround that works. We will still get the same result. We can still hear that note of D. And the problem is that we actually, stop that. The problem is we actually have input echoes switched on. If we try and switch it off, it won't switch off. And that's because we have this track selected. Cakewalk by default, I believe, is set up so that whatever track you have selected will have that input echo on. Now I've changed it to drums now. I'll again press the D on the keyboard. Of course, it starts the bass guitar, but now it's playing the drum. I don't want that. So we'll get around that by going up to Edit, Preferences, and then we'll go down to MIDI and then Playback and Recording, and we'll go down and switch off Always Echo Current MIDI Track. We'll switch that off, click Apply, close that off. Now we can select a track without the echo automatically coming on. We can switch on if we want to, but it doesn't automatically come on. That's very, very useful because now if I press that D on the keyboard, press it again to stop, then that's actually just going to play that little loop without us hearing the sound of the note itself. Okay, the same goes for audio, except we don't have to worry about that issue. So if I was now to go to this guitar cell here, which is an audio cell, I'll right click, I'll click on MIDI Learn, and I'm going to do middle E this time. I've pressed that on my keyboard. You didn't see it, but I did it. Now when I press it again, it starts that cell from playing. So now I can press 2 at the same time. And all is good. Now something like this at the top here, one of these functions, which is the Stop All Cells function, you can also assign that to a MIDI key. So I'll right click on that, click on MIDI Learn. I'm just going to do a note down here, the B. Now that's going to stop everything from playing if it is playing. So again, I'll start those two. And if I press B, stops everything. Okay. Now the other thing that we can do is set it up so that we can actually play whole columns here. So if I just want to set it up, I'll do it a little further up my keyboard. So this one here, I'll right click, I'll click on MIDI Learn, and I'll click on a C, an octave up to start that. And then with this one over here, I'll click on right click and click on MIDI Learn. I'll do another note for that. So now I can use the 2 notes on my keyboard to start off with the main part. Go to the variation. And then I can stop it using that one key. So the MIDI Learn function, really easy to use on here. Now you can take control of the whole matrix using either keys on your MIDI keyboard or, as I say, with drum pads as well. Now that you've got all that happening and you can start to improvise a really sort of cool beat, how do you go ahead and then record your performance? That's what we'll be looking at next. So it's all very well being able to freestyle with the matrix view, either by using your mouse or by using keys on your keyboard or drum pad. But how do you capture that performance? Well, it's very, very easy. You go to this kind of record type icon up here above the matrix view. You click on that, and that's now going to capture what you do with either your mouse on these cells or with keys on your keyboard. Now, the other thing I like to do is synchronize it with the main transport. So I'll click that on there, and you'll see the effect of that in a moment, because I'm going to start off by pressing a key on my keyboard, which is the C key. Now I've got that mapped so it plays the whole column. You'll see that flashing there. It's ready to start playing those cells, but it's not playing those cells yet because I have got that synchronized switched on. As soon as I hit play up here, you'll see that it starts to record the action from those cells. I'll press the variation. Then I'll go to the break. Okay, so that has recorded that performance. You can see it all there. You can see that where it is a MIDI cell, it has recorded, so I'll just switch this off here. It has recorded MIDI data in there, which you could go in and you could actually edit that, and then it's actually recorded all the audio. Now, in the case of where I've got several audio things playing at the same time, but I've got them assigned to one track, as you saw me do earlier, it actually records them to different take lanes. You can see it's created there in Cakewalk. So it's actually all still coming from the same channel, and you'll see it from one channel on your console, but you've got all of the individual bits of audio on each take lane there. Very, very handy indeed. Now, a couple of times during this tutorial, you will have heard that when I press stop, and it happened just those, there'll be a bass note or something that will continue to play. That's because that's a MIDI cell and it's already triggered that long bass note. And just because I've stopped the cell or stopped the transport, it hasn't stopped that note from playing. Just as a little tip, it may be handy if you're getting a lot of that to actually convert that from a MIDI track to an audio track. That just involves freezing the track, capturing the parts that you want, and then grabbing them as audio and dragging them down to cells. Just a little tip in case that's happening for you, as it was for me. So if you tried and failed to use the matrix view before, let me know in the comments down below. If you're still confused, ask questions down there and I'll try my very best to help you out. While you're there, check out the description. You'll find the links there to some of the files that I used in this tutorial so that you can follow along. And also check out the link to my Patreon page, where for as little as $1 per month, you can help me help you by making more videos like this. And I'll see you in the next video.